Hello and good day, everyone. My name is Darlena Birch, MBA, RDN, and most importantly, public health dietitian. Welcome to my YouTube channel where I discuss U.S. federal nutrition programs, the important role they play in ensuring the health and well-being of all Americans, and how public health dietitians work tirelessly to support these amazing programs. All views expressed on this channel are my own and do not represent the opinions of any entity whatsoever with which I have been, am now, or will be affiliated. I spent the last few episodes talking about women who had an impact on nutrition and public health at large. From defining the federal poverty level to creating USDA food plans, women have been making historic advances in these fields for decades. I've really enjoyed talking about these women, so I'm going to continue periodically highlighting these important figures. But for my final few episodes of the season, I'm going to transition away from highlighting these public figures and go back to discussing public health nutrition. So for today's video, I'm going to talk about the appropriations process. I've been working in the DMV for over 5 years now, and full disclosure, I still don't entirely quite understand the appropriations process, but I do know that it's pivotal in setting up the nation's federal budget every year. That's why I want to dedicate today's video to appropriations, because I believe it's important for all Americans to understand how it works. But why are appropriations so confusing? It's because it references jargon unique not just to Congress, but to budget and appropriations procedures as a whole. The process is expected to follow a rigid calendar and series of procedures, but those deadlines and procedures are rarely followed. For those reasons, the complexity and seeming randomness of federal funding decisions is terribly frustrating. So what are appropriations? According to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, appropriations are annual decisions made by Congress about how the federal government spends some of its money. In the largest sense, the government funds a substantial and diverse range of programs and activities, from Pell Grants, which are distributed for college education, to scientific research and military operations. The overwhelming majority of federal spending consists of mandatory spending, which is spent automatically according to formulas. In mandatory funded programs such as Social Security and Medicare, legislation defines the eligibility criteria for participation, and the government allocates funds to all who are eligible, regardless of the annual cost to the Treasury. The other category of funding is known as discretionary funding. Discretionary funded programs have annual allocations that set the total level of funding they can provide within that fiscal year. The Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, also known as WIC, which is the program I've spent my entire career in, falls into this category. The funding process is an annual event. Congress must produce a budget resolution and 12 appropriations bills for each federal fiscal year, which begins on October 1. Both the House and Senate set their own rules for how funding bills are handled, but the impact on federal revenue, which is known as the score, is determined by the Congressional Budget Office. The CBO is also responsible for determining the baseline data used to assess the fiscal standing of the government under various criteria, which is primarily used to project future deficits or surpluses, but also to project the impact of legislation on federal revenues. Okay, so now that I've set the background, let's go into the specific details of the appropriations process. Step 1, the President's funding request. The federal funding process begins with the submission of the President's annual budget request to Congress. Traditionally, this is done on the first Monday in February, though that date often slips, especially when new administrations take office. The President's budget request details the administration's position on the full range of federal revenue and spending. The request encompasses economic projections and analysis, as well as detailed program-by-program funding levels proposed by the administration. In addition, the administration uses the budget request to introduce new policies, programs, or changes they would like to see enacted. The budget document overall runs several thousand pages, including related information, appendices, and charts. It is prepared by the Office of Management and Budget, which functions as the chief administrative agency of the Office of the President. The OMB scores the program funding and policy changes detailed in the budget request. It's important to remember that the President's budget proposal is simply a request. It has no binding authority on Congress and is best understood as a detailed statement by the administration of its fiscal goals and policy preferences. Additionally, as the OMB often produces different scores than the CBO, the budget request often has different numbers than those Congress uses to make its decisions. Step 2, Congressional Budgeting. After the President submits the administration's budget proposal to Congress, the House and Senate budget committees are each directed to report a budget resolution that, if passed by their respective houses, would then be reconciled in a budget conference. The resulting budget resolution, which is not signed by the President, includes what is known as a 302A allocation that sets a total amount of money for the appropriations committees to spend. For example, the conference budget between the House and Senate set the 302A limit for fiscal year 2016 at $1.017 trillion. While the resolution looks at total federal spending over a 10-year window, it is not binding beyond the approaching fiscal year. The budget resolution is both similar to and different from traditional legislation. Like a legislative bill, budget resolutions originate in the relevant committee, which in this case is the respective budget committees of each chamber, and must be approved by the whole chamber. Unlike a traditional bill, budget resolutions do not require presidential action and can pass with a simple majority. Budget resolutions are supposed to be filed by April 15, although this has been rare in recent sessions. More commonly of late, particularly when the chambers are controlled by opposing parties, each chamber will pass its own resolution or simply pass a deeming resolution, a simple resolution which sets the 302A allocation without advancing a budget. Budget resolutions often include multiple policy proposals, usually along the lines of extending or rescinding various tax provisions. Due to their non-legislative status, these proposals are understood to be an effort by the majority to send a message about their fiscal priorities. Step 3. Congressional Appropriations. With the 302A allocations determined, the funding process moves to the Appropriations Committees in each chamber. Long considered one of the most powerful and prestigious committees on which to serve, Appropriations is responsible for determining program-by-program funding levels. This is done through 12 separate appropriations bills, each generated by a specific subcommittee covering individual federal agencies or groupings of agencies. This allocation provides the total funding pool for each of the appropriations bills, known as the 302B allocation. In simple terms, the 302A allocation represents the size of the whole funding pie, while the 302B allocation is equivalent to the size of one of the 12 slices of that pie. Armed with the 302B allocation, the various subcommittees then divide that funding level among the programs under their authority. This process is accompanied by multiple activities. The most visible are public hearings by the subcommittees, where they invite the secretaries of the various agencies to testify on their budget requests. Simultaneously, legislators and their staff from outside the subcommittee submit requests for funding levels they would like to see, expressing their support for programs. Finally, committee staffers often meet with advocates of the programs to discuss the funding outlook. The subcommittee staff then produces an appropriations bill that is brought to the full subcommittee for a vote. If it passes, the bill is then taken up by the full committee, often with several amendments to the underlying bill. This process works in identical fashion in both the House and Senate. It's not uncommon for the two chambers to have different 302As and 302Bs, with the resulting versions of the bill millions or billions of dollars apart. Even when the chambers work from similar allocation levels, differences often occur between the total funding levels for the many programs in each bill. In addition, it has become increasingly common for appropriations bills to include policy changes, also known as riders. A common rider is language prohibiting an agency from using any of the funds included in the bill to perform a certain action that legislators oppose. These riders may vary significantly between the chambers, adding further complication to the process of passing a unified bill. All appropriations bills are supposed to be passed in regular order, meaning full passage of all 12 bills through both chambers, and which are then signed by the President by the start of the federal fiscal year on October 1. Failure to provide appropriations by that date would result in a nearly complete shutdown of federal operations. With so many bills and areas of possible disagreement between the House and Senate, it is not surprising that Congress has difficulty passing each appropriations bill in regular order. As the fiscal year ends, leadership in both chambers will often negotiate on passing all the bills together in one combined package known as an omnibus bill. On certain occasions where less controversial bills have been passed into law, a package of the remaining appropriations bills will be bundled to finish funding work. This package is known colloquially as a minibus. Step 4. The President signs. Regardless of the final form the appropriation bills take, the final step in enacting program funding consists of the President signing the bills. As with more traditional legislation, the President has the authority to veto appropriations bills, and Congress can then attempt to override the veto. A 2/3 vote is required in both chambers to overturn a veto. Thank you for joining me today. If you like what you see, please smash the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember, you are your own best advocate. Feed your body well, nourish your soul, nurture your mind, and nutrify your spirit. Remain true to yourself and never forget that every second forward is another opportunity to be a better version of your past self. Bye!